Warning, the following podcast may cause you to question your belief in government, disregard authority, get arrested, be disowned, or deported. Welcome to another episode of the School of Anarchy podcast. Today's Thursday, May 22nd. I'm your host, Andy.
And I'm Aaron. Before we get started, we'd like to remind everyone that if you enjoy Curmudgeons, then like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and rate our blog posts. We'd also love for you to subscribe to this podcast, and you can do that either via the RSS feed or iTunes. We're also now on Stitcher, a great free mobile app for iOS and Android. All of these links are available in the show notes and on our website, curmudgeons.net.
So on this episode, we're going to tackle the thin versus thick libertarianism debate because the waters aren't muddy enough. We thought we would jump in and muddle them a little further.
We'd like to cause some confusion because, well, we're good at it.
Well, and I think we can help with the confusion because after I read lots of things about this, I was probably more confused than when I started. So, for those who aren't following the detailed analysis of libertarianism day to day, we'll give you the 30-second...
Whoa, who's not doing that?
Well, most normal people, I think, are not doing that. So here's the 30-second breakdown of this debate. Back in 2008, a guy named Charles Johnson wrote a paper that was published in the Freeman magazine by the FEE called Libertarianism Through Thick and Thin. And we'll hit the points that he made in that article or essay in a minute. But I don't think there was a lot of... maybe there was a flare-up of this discussion then, but it kind of was flat until about 2011. It came back again a little bit. Nick Gillespie and Matt Welch wrote a book, and David Gordon reviewed it and basically said, these guys are a joke. I don't understand what they're talking about, libertarianism and these other things that they brought in.
Yeah, the worst thing you could have happen if you're not a pure libertarian is have David Gordon review your book.
Well, he's so sarcastic.
Yes.
But deadpan that it's a big slap across the face. So their book was called Declaration of Independence. I can just read you a little excerpt here.
Oh, would you?
And this is commentary by Matt Zwolinski about this kerfuffle between these guys. But he's basically saying David Gordon's an idiot because he doesn't understand what Nick Gillespie and Matt Welch are talking about, right?
Right.
And he says, thus, while Gillespie and Welch see the rise of interracial marriages as something libertarians should celebrate, David Gordon is unimpressed. Quote, what do you think of interracial marriage? It would be hard offhand to think of a question less relevant to libertarianism as usually understood. Of course, no one has the right forcibly to prevent such marriages. What more need a libertarian say about this issue? End quote.
Well, right.
All right, so we can end the podcast now because David
David Gordon's absolutely right.
So before we started, we flipped a coin and I lost, and I was forced to take the thick libertarian side, but in the end, Aaron relented and decided we could both be on the thin side during this discussion. So you can probably tell already where this is going. That was 2011.
Yes.
Fast forward, about December of last year, 2013, is when this really kicked up and has kind of stayed as a topic in the blogosphere and everything else since then for, 5-6 months now.
Yeah, you can skip every, week and a half on Lou Rockwell's blog. It seems like you'd have a new thick or thin debate going.
Yeah, everybody who's anybody is jumping into the debate. Tom Woods, all the LRC bloggers, my favorite guy, Bobby Wenzel. He's got lots of opinions about it.
Yes.
So let's. Why don't we dive into the original piece, Johnson's article, and hit his points here and see where they lead us in this thick versus thin. And maybe it'll become apparent what this discussion is really about. So Johnson has 4 points, and the first one is what he calls thickness for application. And I'll just read the first paragraph of this section of his essay, and maybe we can discuss it then. So it says, First, there might be some commitments that a libertarian can reject without formally contradicting the non-aggression principle, but which she cannot reject without, in fact, interfering with its proper application. Principles beyond libertarianism alone may be necessary for determining where my rights end and yours begin, or for stripping away conceptual blinders that prevent certain violations of liberty from being recognized as such.
Well, there's this huge gray area between how I want to treat others and how they want to be treated, right? That's what they're trying to say here.
Well,
essentially.
So back to muddling the waters and being confused. To me, this was the most confusing of his 4 points.
Clearly, yes.
So is that what he's saying? That I don't like how you treated me?
I think that's what he's trying to say. Right, well, that's the thing. I think he's going beyond the idea of you trying to treat someone how you would like to be treated, and instead, you're trying to figure out how they want to be treated and do that automatically.
Okay.
You follow the logic there?
No.
Well, it's like I have to be so open to everything and so embracing of all things because this person on the other end might want one of these things.
Well,
it's almost like you have to be all things to all people in order to meet this kind of a whatever it is.
Well, so I'll take your statement at face value, but I'm confused between the first and second sentences of the paragraph. The first one talks about the non-aggression principle, and the second one talks about things beyond libertarianism, which I would say is equated with the non-aggression principle. He says things beyond that may be necessary to determine where my rights end and yours begin. That's the whole point of the non-aggression principle.
Right.
So, no, I'm still confused.
I'm certainly still confused. I'm just presupposing that this is what they mean.
Okay.
That you need to add all this other baggage that everyone else brings to the table in order to fulfill something.
Well,
but the thing is, if you open it up to that sort of a thing, how do you also close it to the other side of that argument? So what if the person wants you to be a racist to them? What if the person, what if the person wants you to act like a normal human being? There's this huge range of human action that can be manifested at any time by whoever based on their motivations and based on what their quote unquote feelings are at the moment, right?
I don't. This one is so almost circular and just amorphous that I don't know that I can get my head around.
Well, there's no point to it, right?
There's no point to it. I mean, he talks about stripping away conceptual blinders that prevent certain violations of liberty from being recognized as such. So, what does that mean? If you're not aggressing against someone, then you have not violated their liberty.
Well, right, but I wonder. Now that you say that, I'm thinking in another way. Maybe they think that people have these conceptual blinders, that it's implied in libertarianism that we need to open their eyes to these things. So this would be crazy people like Christians and stuff like that, people who believe in a church hierarchy maybe, or believe in a household the parents are in charge.
Well, that could be, but I think he hits on that in one of his other points. So.
That's true.
So I think
maybe this isn't really a point.
It might not be a point. We might have to leave this one to itself. And I think this will become clearer as we get through the rest of these, but this is the whole point of this debate is what Johnson and all these other people that have tagged onto this are doing is adding something onto the non-aggression principle, right?
Yeah,
in order to be called a libertarian.
There are other essentials beyond the non-aggression principle for these people.
Right. So let's go to the second point, which he calls thickness from grounds, which I thought he was talking about coffee to begin with, but apparently not.
Wow, lame.
Lame. So here's what he says. Second, libertarians have many different ideas about the theoretical foundation for the non-aggression principle. That is, about the best reasons for being a libertarian. But whatever general foundational beliefs a given libertarian has, those beliefs may have some logical implications other than libertarianism alone. Thus, there may be cases in which certain beliefs or commitments could be rejected without contradicting the non-aggression principle per se, but could not be rejected without logically undermining the deeper reasons that justify the non-aggression principle. Although you could consistently accept libertarianism without accepting these commitments or beliefs, you could not do so reasonably. Rejecting the commitments means rejecting the proper grounds for libertarianism.
That also does not make sense. Tom Woods, I listened to a podcast. He was speaking about this particular point that Johnson had made. And what bothers me about this is Tom Woods essentially said, this is a great coffee shop conversation between libertarians, how you came to libertarianism. But the point is, it's only a great coffee shop conversation about libertarianism because it's just an experiential thing. It's not... How you got there is not the important point. The point is that you got there, and now we all agree on this one thing.
It's what is the there? Where are...
Right, exactly. And I think that's the confusion here.
The part of this point that bothers me is his use of the term proper grounds for libertarianism, right? And it's so progressive sounding, it's scary almost, right? Like... You can only be a libertarian if you got here for the right reasons, right? Like,
right.
If you just don't want people to aggress against you and you want to evangelize that message to other people, that's not an okay reason, right? Or whatever. Maybe that's not what he really meant, but I think it is. That's not okay, right? You have to have come here because there are deeper things or better things that you should want, right?
Mm-hmm. Well,
and to Tom Wood's point in that podcast, right? All this does is narrow the scope of people that we can call libertarians.
Oh, sure, right. Well, the hard part here is this smacks of the same sort of hypocrisy that legalist Christians spout constantly. Right? You're only the right kind of a Christian if you're a Christian, you believe Christ died for your sins, rose from the dead, and you're a Republican, or whatever they add to it.
Right.
This is the part where you immediately fall into hypocrisy, because the very principle of it is that you don't add to it. Not the principle of it, but the essence of it. To remain pure in your concept of it, you don't add to it.
And maybe we'll come back to this. I'm torn on this one only because I think he's sort of right and wrong at the same time. There are deeper things beyond the non-aggression principle in reality, right? But not in libertarianism.
Okay.
So the non-aggression principle doesn't come from nowhere, even despite the fact that many libertarians are atheists and they don't believe in God, right?
Nowhere.
They want it to come from nowhere.
Right.
But libertarianism is not the starting point of morality, right? It's
agreed.
For both of us, it's the outworking of
Certainly.
Other moral principles.
Yeah, I get frustrated because there's so many Christians that wouldn't adhere to the non-aggression
Right,
principle.
exactly.
That it's a huge thing for me. To me, Christianity compels you to the non-aggression principle.
So it's like he wants to take the line where libertarianism starts and move it backwards, right? And then claim that anybody who doesn't adhere to the stuff behind it is not a libertarian, right?
You mean push it forward?
Yes, push it forward.
Yeah, okay,
Yep.
yes.
The things that are backing the non-aggression principle.
Yes,
Yep.
exactly. There has to be a certain level of presupposition that
Yes.
is agreed to in order to come at the non-aggression principle from the correct perspective.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the libertarianism and non-aggression principles still work in our fallen world, even if even with atheists who don't believe in God, don't believe in those other moral principles that we do, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So for him to say that is kind of almost to reject many of the people that are in the movement already, right? Because they don't come at it with the right basis or something.
Well, and the thing is, it's not just the people within the movement. If you start narrowing like this, right, and you spread that out to the wider community,
yep,
you're eliminating a possible 50%. If you want to talk about people who say they're religious in one way or another.
Or anyone new, right? Like, you can never come
That's what I mean. Out of the whole pool of available people to convert to the libertarian cause, let's say. Oh, that's a bad word, probably, convert.
All right, let's move to the third one here. because I think we'll probably come back to this one. So his third one is strategic thickness, which is kind of a funny one, just the title. So he says, so it's called Strategic Thickness, the Causes of Liberty. And to me, this one may be the most cynical or the shallowest of all of them. But here's what he says. Third, there also may be cases in which certain ideas, practices, or projects are entailed by neither the non-aggression principle nor the best reasons for it, and are not logically necessary for its correct application either, but are preconditions for implementing the non-aggression principle in the real world. Although rejecting these ideas, practices, or projects would be logically compatible with libertarianism, their success might be important or even necessary for libertarianism to get much purchase in an existing statist society, or for a future free society to emerge from statism without widespread poverty or social conflict, or for a future free society to sustain itself against aggressive statist neighbors, the threat of civil war, or an internal collapse back into statism. So, what I have to say about this is, this guy is obviously no student of economics combined with libertarian philosophy or history.
Well, certainly not.
Right? I mean, no one can make this statement except in a vacuum, because all these things are intricately woven together, right? Why do we have civil wars? Why do we have such a huge disparity between rich and poor people? Why do we have all these, other things he talks about, social conflict? Right. They're all because of the state to begin with. So
yes, exactly.
The idea that you could emerge from statism to a libertarian society and still have all these things that are caused by statism doesn't really make any sense.
Right. Let's take, for example, gay marriage.
All right, let's take gay marriage.
If the government was not involved,
mm-hmm.
if it was still churches making these decisions, it would be up to the churches to legislate what it was that they wanted to happen in their churches.
Yep.
Therefore, we wouldn't have this issue. Or if we had this issue, it wouldn't be about the government giving them the right to do something or not do something.
I had this same discussion with a friend of mine who's, a left-leaning. He's also an atheist, but a very smart guy.
Mm-hmm.
And it was about some state decision about teaching creationism or something somewhere. And I said, this would be a non-issue. In my libertarian or anarchist utopia, this is a non-issue because we don't have to talk about whether tax money goes to the school system to teach this or that, right? We don't have to talk about any of this stuff. You send your children to where you want to learn the things you want. I send mine to somewhere else. And we're not fighting over anything, right?
Right.
It's not an issue. Same with gay marriage. Same with all of these quote unquote social conflict problems.
Yes. Well, and the other thing about this is what really started to wear on me is there are no examples for this.
Right.
All right, you've got all these great reasons to be a thick libertarian or whatever. Provide me with just one.
That's a great point because as I read this, and admittedly, I'm a much more concrete than abstract person.
Yes.
We have confirmation. So I struggle sometimes reading more abstract things. So
sure, yeah.
It helps me to have a concrete example, and then I can go back to the abstract and say, okay, now I see where that fits in. But he provided none of that in this, right? There are no concrete examples of what he's talking about.
And the beauty of this sort of abstraction is that it makes it infinitely harder to attack the position.
Right. I don't know what he's saying. I can't.
And yeah, well, and to say that it's confused, to say that it's muddled, to say that it doesn't make any sense is simple, but he can come back with an argument about you just don't understand.
Right.
And it's then we're not even talking about the things that we want to be talking about. Whereas if you provide an example, we can tell you you're a moron. And this is why, this is what would really happen.
It really reminds me of super academic papers.
Sure.
Something like a university professor publishes this arcane paper on a topic.
Yeah.
Who's going to argue with him, right? It's
well, and the whole idea is to establish a position of authority without necessarily having any sort of understanding of the topic.
I think so. Well, and then this third point I think proves it, right?
Yeah.
Nobody with any even if you could agree with his other points, he would say, well, how could you even make this statement, right? It doesn't make any sense.
Right.
So, all right, let's move on to number 4. He calls it thickness from consequences.
Also a funny title.
The effects of liberty. And here's what he says. Finally, there may be social practices or outcomes that libertarians should, parentheses in some sense, be committed to opposing. Calm down. We made it through 3 without laughing.
I know.
Committed to opposing, even though they are not themselves coercive, because, number 1, government coercion is a precondition for them, and number 2, there are independent reasons for regarding them as social evils. If aggression is morally illegitimate, then libertarians are entitled not only to condemn it, but also to condemn the destructive results that flow from it, even if those results are, in some important sense, external to the actual coercion. Then he goes on to say, thus, for example, left libertarians such as Kevin Carson and Matt McKenzie have argued forcibly for libertarian criticism of certain business practices such as low-wage sweatshop labor as exploitative. So, there's probably 2 points about this. The one is at the very beginning where he says should, in some sense, and I really like that because this is where this whole argument leads to, right? Yeah. If you're going to write a paper that says, here are the things that libertarianism is, right? Non-aggression principle plus X, then you're necessarily saying that you have to commit to the non-aggression principle plus X in order to be libertarian, right? So then you should, in some sense, do these things, right? What he really wants to say is must.
Yeah,
but
he does.
But that would be too far, so he's hedging here.
Right.
About
he clearly knows exactly what he's doing. That parenthesis tells you everything you need to know.
So there may be social practices that libertarians should be committed to opposing, even though they're not actually coercive. So
now,
again, this would be a great place to put an example. Well, he does give us one, I guess, but not from himself. It's from these other guys. So,
well, before we get to the example, though, he gives reasons for this, right? The first is that government coercion is a precondition for them.
For them, them being the social practices or outcomes. Right.
So we should oppose things because the government coerces people to do them. Isn't that part of the non-aggression principle?
Well, we should oppose the government coercing them, right?
Well, yeah, certainly. That's the whole point.
So if the government,
not that the practices mean anything.
It's like a guy puts a gun to my head and tells me he's going to blow my brains out if I don't do something, and I do the thing, and then we condemn me, right? Not the guy that put the gun to my head.
Right. Well, and the other thing is, if we oppose the government coercion, and that's the precondition for this thing,
it'll go away.
It'll go away. How is this?
All right, so what's his
this guy doesn't know how to do math.
No, I don't think so. So his number 2 was there are independent reasons for regarding them as social evils. I'm not quite sure where he's going with this one, actually.
That is a bold-faced admission that you need to add to the non-aggression principle.
Okay.
And it needs to be from his worldview.
So
those independent reasons are so compelling that you need to adopt them as well.
So you think his example of the low-wage sweatshop falls into this one?
It has to.
So low wage, that's a loaded term to begin with, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because low compared to what?
Well, and the thing is, if it's so low, no one would do it.
Well, low wage and sweatshop, I guess, are both, right? So labor is the thing we're talking about. Yes. And then we add this low-wage sweatshop onto it and say that is something that is a social evil independent of the non-aggression principle. So I'll call it a sweatshop because it's hot in there because it's in Indonesia, right? So I have this place and I offer employment and people come and work there voluntarily, but that's not okay. We should oppose that.
We should oppose it because, well, there's no reason to oppose it. I don't understand. Well, I just don't understand.
I think we're back to he doesn't understand economics, right?
Yes. Well, Yes, he doesn't understand the most basic principle, and that is that if there is an opportunity presented and people take it up, they want to take it up. They don't do it because they don't want to take it up.
If I were to take his example just one step further, what he would be saying then is that we should oppose allowing people to work for whatever wage they want to, right?
Yes,
we should prevent them from earning any wage, even if it's low according to his standards. So we should make them earn 0, not X, because he has some independent reason for regarding that as a social evil.
Right. Well, you know what the next step is? Minimum wage.
Right. So
it is. There's no way around it at this point.
There's the next logical conclusion, right?
Yes.
Because he's equated, amazingly, voluntary exchange with coercion.
Yes.
Right?
Well, the funny part is, right after that, the next point after that is the maximum wage.
Yes. So if I could take that a step further, it would say that, and I threw out Indonesia, right? So we could pick any poor country. It basically is saying that those people that live there, they're poor, and we have to take that a step further and say, well, they're poor because of someone else, and that's why it's not fair, and that other person is probably you, right? So that's why you're not allowed to do that, you know.
Yes.
And it still becomes almost a circular argument, right? Like, you did this awful thing to this person somehow and made them poor, but you're not allowed to offer them a job with that low of a wage.
Right. Well, and the worst part is, how then does anyone crawl out of poverty?
Well, you need the state.
Well, obviously, because you have to offer higher wages, which means that somehow you're going to have to force people to buy these overpriced products.
So have we come full circle? Are we now saying that thick libertarianism is statism?
Essentially. I didn't want to say that walking into this conversation,
but as you follow the flow...
Yeah. If it's not statism, it's the precursor for statism. I'm going to move the line for statism forward and put things behind it so that these guys can still fit into some other category.
I think at the very least it means these people are very confused and nowhere near close to libertarianism.
Well, and later on in the notes here, I feel like it's more of an argument of individualists versus revolutionaries.
Absolutely. Yeah.
These people have something they want to change in addition to getting rid of coercion,
which in and of itself is not bad, right? As an individual, right?
Yes, as a solitary person with this belief, and even as a person trying to convince others of this belief, great.
Right. But
saying you need to adopt it because I said so,
basically,
makes you a revolutionary rather than a person who believes in individual liberty.
Yeah. So
I want to break it down so I can impose my own order.
At the risk of applying labels here, which I got in trouble for the other day on Twitter. I don't know if you saw, but I basically said that Kennedy from Fox Business, she used to host of The Independence.
Oh, yes.
She used to be MTV VJ, was not a libertarian. She took a lot of offense to that. Actually, what I said was she was worse for calling herself a libertarian than Rick Santorum was for actually being on TV and being himself, because we all know what Rick Santorum is.
Yes, yeah, and I don't know that he hides it much.
Justin Raimondo told me to be kind because she's still learning.
He might have a point.
Yeah. About being kind or her learning?
About being kind.
Yeah.
I'm not so sure she's.
I left it alone after that. So that was my being kind. So
well, sometimes that is as kind as we can be.
So to the labels, then I think it's almost backwards, right? It's the thick libertarians are the ones that have been saying you're not a real libertarian unless you adopt all these things.
Yes,
but they're the ones that are not real libertarians because they as we follow this logical progression, are embracing these ideas that have to lead to statism.
Every time I thought about us having this conversation, I thought to myself, we got off the bus at just the right time. not calling ourselves libertarianisms, but or yeah, libertarianisms, libertarian, but rather calling ourselves anarchists.
I agree. The word has been so misused and misapplied. It's it almost means nothing at this point.
I've seen Sean Hannity in print called a libertarian. This
Every
it just
everybody
there's no
on Fox News can call themselves a libertarian, right?
end. Well, Obama could come out tomorrow and call himself a libertarian.
Not true.
It really, the way that they have brutalized this term
And
has,
that was a nice segue.
has really opened things up. Speaking of brutalism,
Very nice. Yeah.
I want to read something that Jeffrey Tucker wrote.
You don't really want to read it, but you will.
I will, because I actually do get a little bit of enjoyment out of it just because it's so hilarious. He wrote an article also in FEE, or I should say in the Freeman from FEE, and it's called Against Libertarian Brutalism. And I'm going to read just a little snippet, enough to get a flavor. He says, "Why should we favor human liberty over social order ruled by power? In providing the answer, I would suggest that libertarians can generally be divided into two camps, humanitarians and brutalists. The humanitarians are drawn to reasons such as the following. Liberty allows peaceful human cooperation. It inspires the creative service of others. It keeps violence at bay. It allows for capital formation and prosperity. It protects human rights of all against invasion. It allows human associations of all sorts to flourish on their own terms. It socializes people with rewards toward getting along rather than tearing each other apart, and leads to a world in which people are valued as ends in themselves rather than fodder in the central plan. In other words, rainbows and unicorns." He goes on. "We know all of this from history and experience. These are all great reasons to love liberty. But they are not the only reasons that people support liberty. There's a segment of the population of self-described libertarians, described here as brutalists, who find all of the above rather boring, broad, and excessively humanitarian. To them, what's impressive about liberty is that it allows people to assert their individual preferences, to form homogeneous tribes, to work out their biases in action, to ostracize people based on politically incorrect standards, to hate to their heart's content, so long as no violence is used as a mean, to shout down people based on their demographics or political opinions, to be openly racist and sexist, to exclude and isolate and be generally malcontented with modernity, and to reject civil standards of values and etiquette in favor of antisocial norms." I'm not going to read anymore just because I'm going to start laughing too much. What is this?
This is the reason Jeff Tucker is no longer at the Mises Institute, which became glaringly clear during this whole thick versus thin debate, right? We were all wondering a couple years ago, like, what happened to Jeff Tucker? All of a sudden he's gone. They're hiring new people. Well, this is why.
Yeah. Yeah, obviously. I don't understand. I don't understand the perspective here.
I think from what I know of him and all the things he's written and said, I think his heart's in the right place. But
I think so.
His logic and his understanding of libertarianism is back to what we talked about with Charles Johnson, right? The NAP plus X, is required. And it's almost worse than that when you would go so far as to call these people that you worked with for however many years brutalists, right? Like, you're not good enough for me because you, what does he say? What's impressive about liberty to them is that it allows people to assert their individual preferences. I mean, if I stopped the sentence there,
everyone would agree.
It'd be like, well, that's crazy, Jeff. I'm like, yeah, that's why we like liberty, because I can express my preference, right? As long as it doesn't violate your rights, and you can do the same thing. So what's wrong with that? He's added to this thing other things, right? That we should, again, want, or we should use our freedom to do. And again, I'll go back to things that back up the non-aggression principle, right? From a Christian worldview. Mm-hmm. Yes, there are other things we should do with our freedom.
Yes, certainly.
Right? But I and I'll even go tell you that, right? Which is, to be fair, is what he's just doing, right? He's just telling you should do this. But
I don't know that he is.
But I'm not telling you that as part of libertarianism, right? Because I think
exactly right. It's completely separate.
Yeah, he's lumped the two together, and I don't think that. I don't think when I tell people things that I think, I'm not lumping libertarianism in with my Christianity per se.
Oh, sure. I can't tell you. I can't count probably to the number of times I've said to people, well, most libertarians would not agree with my perspective on this because, they're not Christians or they're not homeschoolers. There's a million things we do all add on to it to find our own
for ourselves
individual preferences.
Yeah, for ourselves.
Ourselves. And that is the beauty. And I don't understand how that beauty can be misapprehended as being brutal.
The only way is almost this may come out the wrong way, but it's almost like he does the same thing with Christianity and libertarianism as Republicans do with Christianity, right? They lump the two together and say that they, the one equals the other, or they have to go together.
Right.
Which I think is what he's doing here, right? Again, back to his motives for, people not to be racist or sexist or to, all the, not engage in antisocial behavior and all these other things. Those are all good values. But again, libertarianism is not Christianity, and they don't start at the same place.
Agreed. Well, and the difficulty here that libertarian philosophy, I guess I should say, has a beautiful way of, I hesitate to use the word avoid, but I can't think of anything better at the moment, of avoiding all these nitpicky, tiny little preferences, right? Mm-hmm. It goes for the big general principle, lays it at the table, and everything works out from there. When we apply it in our own lives, of course, we have to pair things to it because we are people coming to this principle.
Yep.
Right? And I think finding that borderline, finding the way to compartmentalize what you believe to be true and what you know to fit a standard that is acceptable to all are very different things.
Well, how could you ever find a standard that's acceptable to all?
That's what I mean, right? So at what line does he say, what is sexism?
So
is it any form of patriarchy? If my wife decides that she wants to be second in command in the house rather than an equal partner with me, who am I even to say that that's a bad idea for her?
Well, and from some of the things I read of this, and back to Charles Johnson, that I think that's maybe some of the point about people don't recognize the violations of liberty, so to speak.
Right. So my wife, if she chooses to be second in command, doesn't realize that I'm really being a brutalist to her.
That's right. Yep. And so the logical conclusion of this is really statism again, and
it is.
It's progressivism. It's the egalitarianism. It's all these isms that we, as libertarians, are against. So
yes,
it's a lot strange coming from Jeff Tucker.
It is. And it's disturbing, really.
Yep. So that's our run through thick versus thin libertarianism. And you can probably figure out which side we're on. I would describe myself as the invisible libertarian.
I will describe myself as an anarchist.
Yes, I think that's the better.
I'm still avoiding because it's better.
It's a better term. So I don't know if we helped or hurt everyone's understanding of this, but it is what it is. If you disagree or you agree or you have any thoughts, send us hate mail or Facebook posts or whatever you feel like. But as long as you're on Facebook and you're ranting, go ahead and hit the follow button. And then you'll see all of our other awful things that we post as well. So thanks for listening. And when we come up with a new topic, we'll be back to talk about it.